Wherever you are right now, I hope you're comfortable. Maybe the light around you is dim, or the world outside your window has grown quiet. Perhaps there's the soft hum of something familiar, a fan, a whisper of traffic, or just the steady rhythm of your own breathing. Tonight, let's drift into the forest. Not the forest as a postcard or a hiking trail, but the living, breathing organism that it truly is. A world older than human memory, where every movement, every whisper of wind, every fallen leaf becomes part of a language few of us have ever truly heard. Our story begins with a question. How do trees remember the wind? It's a poetic question, yes, but also a scientific one. Because trees, though rooted and silent, are not still. They live in slow motion, listening, adapting, remembering. Each gust of air that brushes their leaves, each storm that bends their branches, leaves behind a trace, a pattern woven into the very structure of their wood. If you were to walk into a forest after a storm, you might notice something subtle. Some trees lean a little more to one side. Some have thicker trunks. Some seem to shiver quietly, even when the air is calm. To most of us, this seems random, the way nature just happens. But to a biologist or an ecologist, it's evidence of memory. The memory written in wood. Inside a tree, memory doesn't look like ours. There are no neurons, no synapses, no electric sparks firing in the dark. But there are patterns, structures shaped by experience. When a strong wind bends a tree, its tissues feel that pressure. Cells deep inside the trunk sense the strain and begin to grow differently. The wood becomes denser on the side that bears the brunt of the wind. This is called thigmomorphogenesis, the biological process by which plants alter their growth in response to mechanical stress. It's a long word for something deeply intuitive, the way living things remember touch. Imagine this: a sapling sways in a strong wind. Each time it bends, it learns a little. Over days, weeks, and seasons, the tree builds itself around those lessons. Its fibers toughen. Its trunk thickens where the strain was greatest. Its branches redistribute weight to keep balance. So when the next storm comes, the tree is ready. It doesn't consciously recall the previous winds, but it has become its own memory. In a way, this is how all of nature remembers, not through thought, but through form. The world keeps a record of what has happened by changing shape. Listening to pressure. If you place a stethoscope against a tree during a windstorm, something scientists have actually done, you would hear faint clicks and pops inside. Tiny microfractures form as the tree flexes, not breaking but adjusting. These are not signs of damage, but signs of adaptation. Deep inside the xylem, the water-carrying vessels of the tree, vibrations travel faster than sound. When wind pushes a branch, it sends a wave of tension through the whole organism. Cells sense it through structures in their walls called mechanoreceptors. These receptors translate pressure into a kind of cellular language, one that triggers chemical messengers and alters gene expression. The tree, in other words, listens through its own body. It doesn't think the way we do, but it feels the shape of the world and responds accordingly. And over years, sometimes centuries, those responses accumulate. A pine that grew on a windswept hill becomes stout and low, while its cousin in the valley rises tall and straight. The difference between them is not chance, it's experience. A memory of motion. We often think of plants as static, passive backdrops to the moving life around them. But they move too. They move in ways that unfold over hours, days, or decades, so slowly that the human eye rarely notices. Time-lapse photography changed that perception. When scientists began to film trees and plants over long periods, they discovered a hidden choreography. Branches sway and twist with intention, leaves tilt to follow light, roots curl through soil like patient fingers searching for water. When the wind arrives, this hidden motion becomes visible. It's not just random fluttering, it's a distributed dance of flexibility and restraint. Each leaf adjusts its angle to reduce drag. Each branch bends just enough to absorb energy without breaking. Over time, this motion leaves a record. The cells that felt the greatest strain grow differently. New wood forms with fibers angled along the lines of force. The memory of the wind becomes architecture. Some researchers describe this as structural memory. The tree's shape is a living history book, each ring and curve a record of what it has endured. In that sense, a forest is an archive, a slow accumulation of environmental memory, written in cellulose and lignin instead of ink. The tree's inner library. If we cut across a fallen trunk, and let's do so gently in imagination without harm, we see a circle of rings. Each ring marks a year of growth. Light and dark bands alternate, one for the fast-growing spring, one for the slower, denser summer. But the rings tell more than time. They tell of droughts, floods, fires, and windstorms. Dendrochronologists, scientists who study tree rings, can reconstruct centuries of weather from these patterns. They can see the cold snap of a distant winter, the year a river overflowed, or the seasons when high winds shaped the land. The tree does remember these events as stories. It remembers them as structure, as subtle changes in density, in fiber direction, in the chemistry of its wood. But to those who know how to read it, that structure is a narrative as rich as any human chronicle. In the forests of Scandinavia, for example, scientists have matched tree ring patterns across thousands of years, creating a continuous record that reaches back to the Ice Age. In that timeline, you can trace the echoes of ancient winds, the same atmospheric rhythms that once brushed the faces of our ancestors. So when you stand beside an old oak and feel the breeze stir its leaves, you're standing in the presence of memory. Not your memory, not mine, but the earth. The language of sway. In 2012, researchers at the University of Florence did an experiment with poplar trees. They exposed some to gentle mechanical shaking and left others untouched. The shaken trees grew shorter and sturdier, their trunks thickened, their cell walls reinforced. Even weeks after the shaking stopped, their growth patterns remained different. This was not random, it was remembered. A kind of embodied learning. It's a principle that applies beyond trees. Grass, vines, even tiny seedlings all respond to touch and motion. The famous experiment by Charles Darwin and his son Francis in the 1880s showed that when a seedling's tip is touched repeatedly, it changes its growth direction, as though it has learned where not to go. Darwin called this plant sensitivity, and he was among the first to suggest that plants might possess a primitive form of awareness. Today, we might call it mechanosensory memory. But whatever we name it, the essence is simple. Every touch, every gust, every shadow of force leaves a trace. In that sense, a tree remembers the wind the way water remembers the shape of the riverbank, not by thought, but by form. The patience of the living world. As the light fades in our imagined forest, the air grows still. You can almost hear the quiet, that deep, resonant kind of silence that isn't empty, but full of listening. If you were to stay here through the night, you'd see how the forest breathes. Tiny pores on the leaves, called stomata, close to conserve moisture. Sap pressure changes, shifting subtly like blood flow. Even in darkness, life continues its slow dialogue with the air. Somewhere in the soil, fine roots move, so small you'd need a microscope to see them. They press through grains of earth, mapping the underground world inch by inch. And just like their branches above, these roots remember pressure, direction, and resistance. They learn the architecture of their surroundings. Through networks of mycorrhizal fungi, delicate white threads that connect roots across vast distances, one tree can even warn another. When wind damage or insect attack occurs, chemical signals pass underground, priming neighbors to adjust their metabolism or strengthen their tissues. It's not speech as we know it, but it is communication. And communication in its simplest form is memory shared. The forest that learns. Scientists studying repeated wind exposure in poplars found something remarkable. Not only do trees change their structure in response to wind, they retain a kind of genetic readiness. Even new shoots that grow later exhibit different sensitivities, as though the memory has been imprinted in their developmental programming. This raises profound questions about what it means to learn. If a tree can adjust its growth strategy based on past experience and pass that adjustment to new tissue, then the boundary between reflex and memory begins to blur. Perhaps life doesn't need a brain to remember. Perhaps memory is the fundamental property of being alive, the capacity to change because something once happened. From that perspective, every cell on Earth carries memory, the memory of pressure, light, heat, chemistry, time. And trees, being so long-lived, simply remember longer. The forest at night becomes a cathedral of patience. The wind stirs again, and leaves rustle in overlapping rhythms, 1,000 small conversations blending into one. You realize, listening, that the trees are not passive against the wind. They are participating in it. Each gust is both teacher and sculptor, and the forest, as a whole, becomes a memory of motion turned into form. When you walk among them tomorrow, perhaps you'll notice how each trunk curves just so, how each branch bends toward light or away from prevailing wind. That's not randomness. That's memory, slow, biological, unspoken memory. And in their silence, they have been listening longer than any of us have existed. When morning comes to the forest, it doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in, a quiet silver light filtering through mist and branches. The ground, still damp from the night, exhales a faint, earthy scent. Somewhere above, the first thin rays of sun brush against dew-soaked leaves and the forest stirs awake. You can feel it, a slow turning toward light. Each leaf reorients, each branch adjusts ever so slightly. Its movement measured not in seconds, but in hours. The forest, in its own language of slowness, is remembering the direction of warmth and wind. Last night we drifted through the idea that trees can remember, not through thought or words, but through the way they grow. This morning we'll look deeper into the shape of that memory. Because what begins as a response to pressure becomes something more, a record of resilience, of experience etched into living architecture. The geometry of adaptation. If you look closely at a tree that spent its life on a windswept cliff, you'll notice how its branches twist and curl away from the prevailing gusts. The wood grain itself spirals, following invisible lines of force. This is not random artistry. It's biomechanics, nature's own engineering. Wood is anisotropic, meaning it doesn't have uniform strength in every direction. It's strongest along the grain, weaker across it. So when a tree grows, it constantly adjusts its internal geometry to distribute tension and compression. Over time, these microscopic adjustments accumulate. The trunk thickens on the side facing the wind, the reaction wood. In conifers, this is called compression wood, rich in lignin, dense and dark. In broadleaf trees, it's called tension wood, formed on the opposite side, pulling the tree upright like a muscle. It's as if the tree has an inner memory of balance, constantly recalibrating itself, learning the shape of the world's forces. When scientists model this process mathematically, they often find that trees behave like self-optimizing structures. Given enough time and pressure, they naturally evolve the most efficient form for their environment, minimizing stress, maximizing strength, using the least material possible. It's evolution, yes, but it's also adaptation within a single lifetime. Each tree is an experiment in remembering how to stand. Rings as records. The next time you see a cross-section of a tree trunk, whether in a museum or an old log, notice how the rings aren't perfectly concentric. They're often thicker on one side, thinner on another. Those asymmetries are stories. The thicker side might mark the direction of greatest growth, perhaps facing the sun or away from the wind. Sometimes a scar appears, a dark streak of resin where lightning struck or insects burrowed. Each irregularity is a line in the diary of that tree's life. Dendrochronologists can use these variations to infer wind direction decades, even centuries ago. In the twisted pines of Patagonia, researchers have traced patterns of prevailing winds across millennia by studying how compression wood forms on the windward side of trunks. It's remarkable, the atmosphere itself, recorded not in instruments or charts, but in the bodies of living trees. The tree doesn't know it's keeping records. It simply responds, and that response is the record. The memory is not separate from the body. The memory is the body. Cellular echoes. Let's travel deeper, not through the forest, but through the tree itself. Imagine zooming down through the bark, past the phloem and cambium, into the wood cells where growth takes place. Here, in this microscopic world, the story of memory continues. When wind pressure flexes the trunk, certain cells sense tension through changes in their membranes. Tiny proteins, known as mechanosensitive ion channels, open to allow calcium ions to rush in. That small electrical pulse triggers a cascade of biochemical signals, activating genes responsible for strengthening the cell wall, rearranging cellulose fibers, or increasing lignin production. In that moment, a physical event, a gust of wind, becomes a biological response. And if the same force happens again and again, those signaling pathways become primed, more responsive. In some species, this even leads to epigenetic memory, small chemical marks added to DNA that influence how genes are expressed later, long after the wind has stopped. So when we say that a tree remembers the wind, it's not metaphor alone. There's a molecular trace, a biological echo of motion. The wind signature. Every place on Earth has its own signature of air. The steady trade winds across the tropics, the erratic gusts over mountain ridges, the soft, circular breezes of coastal mornings. Each leaves a distinct fingerprint on the vegetation it touches. In Japan, along the Sea of Okhotsk, there are forests where all the trees lean inland at identical angles, not because of a single storm, but because of a lifetime of wind. The same pattern appears in the Falkland Islands, where the relentless southern gales sculpt trees into natural arches, known locally as flag trees. To stand beneath them is to see time itself bent by the wind. These living sculptures are not accidents. They are evidence of persistence, memory written in form. And while we might call them deformed, nature would call them adapted. In the language of the forest, every curve and lean is wisdom accumulated. The conversation beneath. Memory in trees doesn't live only in wood or cells. It lives underground too. Through a network of fungal threads, the mycorrhizal network trees share resources and information. A gust that breaks one tree's branch can send a chemical signal through the soil, triggering nearby trees to alter their metabolism, sometimes even shifting nutrient flow. Susan Simard, a Canadian ecologist, famously showed that these underground connections can transmit carbon, nitrogen, and chemical messages across entire stands of forest. Some older trees, the so-called mother trees, act as hubs, redistributing resources to younger ones when times are hard. When a storm passes, these networks change. Root connections are strained, nutrient exchanges fluctuate, and the signals of stress echo underground for days. So even if a tree stands alone above ground, beneath the soil it is never solitary. And if memory is the capacity to retain and respond to experience, then perhaps the forest as a whole remembers, too, as a single, distributed mind made of roots, fungi, and slow communication. Wind as teacher. For a young tree, wind is both threat and teacher. In a windless greenhouse, trees grow tall but fragile. Their trunks are thin, their wood soft. When exposed to the outdoors, they often snap in the first storm. This is why foresters sometimes deliberately expose saplings to controlled wind, a practice called mechanical conditioning. A gentle breeze, repeated daily, produces stronger, more resilient wood. It's as if the tree must learn to live with motion, to let go of rigidity and find strength in flexibility. There's a lesson there for us too. Because humans, like trees, often grow stronger when we bend. When life pushes and pulls at us, we adapt, forming invisible rings of resilience. The tree remembers the wind, we remember the struggle. Both forms of memory are stories written in structure. The whisper of time. Stand in a forest on a calm day, and you can still feel traces of past storms. The way certain trunks lean, the open gaps where branches once fell, the twisted shapes of trees that have been pushed for years in the same direction. Every piece of the landscape is a whisper of time. Wind is one of Earth's oldest sculptors. Long before humans or even mammals, wind shaped the distribution of seeds, the erosion of rock, the evolution of plant forms. The first trees, towering lycophytes of the Devonian period, 400 million years ago, learned to anchor themselves against the air's invisible current. Without that challenge, wood might never have evolved its remarkable strength. In a sense, every tree alive today carries the genetic memory of those ancient winds, the pressure that forced their ancestors to grow thicker, taller, more resilient. So when we talk about memory, we're talking about inheritance as well, the knowledge of air encoded across generations. The breath between worlds. At a slower rhythm, wind and tree form a duet, a back and forth exchange of gases, energy, and motion. Wind stirs leaves, leaves shape wind. The boundary between them is porous fluid. Photosynthesis depends on this movement. Carbon dioxide enters through tiny openings on leaves, while oxygen exits. The balance of gases that sustains life on Earth is maintained by this delicate, rhythmic breath between the atmosphere and the living green. In this way, the wind doesn't just shape trees mechanically, it sustains them physiologically, and they, in turn, shape the composition of the very air that drives them. It's a feedback loop, a conversation between two ancient forces. If we were to slow time to the pace of trees, we might see the world differently. The gusts of air that seem momentary to us would become long, rolling waves. The seasons would appear as tides of motion. And through those tides, trees would sway, grow, and remember. The philosophy of stillness. There's something quietly philosophical about the way trees remember. They do not resist the wind with force. They yield and reshape. They absorb motion and translate it into strength. Human memory often clings to experience through recollection, by holding it tightly. But trees show us another way, remembering by becoming, by integrating change into structure. Perhaps this is the wisdom of the forest, that memory need not be conscious to be profound. That endurance is a kind of intelligence, and that the world itself, through every bending branch and weathered root, keeps record of what has passed. When you stand beneath a canopy and hear the wind sigh through the leaves, you're listening to memory in motion, a story being rewritten each moment, yet built on every moment that came before. And maybe in some small way, the wind remembers too. The forest does not awaken suddenly. It rises gently, as though surfacing from a dream. The morning mist has lifted, and light falls through the canopy in long, golden shafts, catching the slow drift of dust and pollen. The air itself seems alive, carrying whispers of distant branches moving. The faint percussion of leaves brushing against each other. If you stand very still, you begin to realize something subtle. The forest is never silent and never still. Even in calm weather, trunks creak almost imperceptibly. Leaves flutter in microcurrents. Roots expand and contract with moisture. Each sound, each movement, is a continuation of the story we've been following. The story of memory written not in words or thoughts, but in the patterns of life itself. Because the wind never really stops, it only changes form. And trees never really forget. They keep remembering through shape, through chemistry, through time. Echoes of the wind inside the wood. Inside the heartwood of a mature tree, that dark, dense core no longer carrying water, traces of the world still remain. Resin hardened by a storm's wound, microscopic cracks sealed by the tree's slow repair, a change in the ratio of carbon isotopes revealing the pattern of sunlight decades ago. Even dead wood keeps memory. In ancient bogs, scientists have unearthed trunks preserved for thousands of years, their rings still bearing the rhythms of wind and drought from long before recorded history. By analyzing the structure of these rings, we can reconstruct not only temperature and rainfall, but also the intensity and direction of prevailing winds. The trees that once stood alive in the ancient winds of the Bronze Age now speak to us across millennia, through the language of growth and decay. They remind us that memory in the natural world does not depend on consciousness. It depends on persistence, the intelligence of flexibility. When engineers design tall buildings, they study trees. They watch how trunks taper upward, how branches distribute stress, how roots spread wide to anchor without rigidity. Unlike most human structures, trees do not resist wind completely. They yield, absorb, and return the energy. In biomechanics, this is called resonant damping. Each tree has its own natural frequency, a rhythm at which it sways. When wind matches that rhythm, motion amplifies. But trees have evolved ways to shift their resonance by adjusting water content and internal stiffness. It's as if they tune themselves to the wind. Over a lifetime, a tree's resonance can change, growing slower and more grounded with age. And this tuning is part of their memory. It's not stored in the brain, but in the interplay between physics and biology, a dynamic relationship between matter and motion. Humans, too, carry such resonance. The way we adapt to change, the way our voices and bodies respond to the world, all reflect a kind of lived tuning. But trees show us what it means to embody that principle for centuries, not decades. When the wind teaches the forest. In 1999, a powerful windstorm swept across Central Europe, felling more than 200 million cubic meters of timber. For months afterward, ecologists studied the fallen trees and those left standing. They noticed that in mixed forests, where species of different flexibilities grew together, damage was less severe. The wind's energy was dissipated unevenly, shared among forms. In a monoculture forest, by contrast, identical trees resonated together, amplifying the destruction. It was a quiet revelation. Diversity makes memory resilient. A forest that remembers many forms of movement, tall, short, broad, narrow, can survive better than one that remembers only one way to stand. And in that way, the memory of wind becomes a lesson in community. Each tree, by its structure, contributes to the forest's collective ability to endure. The whole becomes stronger than the sum of its trunks. This, too, is how ecosystems think, not through thoughts, but through interactions shaped by history. Trees and the wind in art and thought. For as long as humans have watched trees, we have seen in them reflections of ourselves. In ancient China, poets wrote of the pine that bends but does not break, a symbol of endurance. In Norse mythology, the world itself grows from a tree, Yggdrasil, whose roots and branches hold the sky and underworld in balance. In Japanese Zen gardens, wind-sculpted pines embody impermanence, their forms shaped by unseen forces. Across cultures, wind and tree have always been metaphors for resilience and change, one shaping, one yielding. And perhaps that's because, even without science, people have long intuited what we now measure in laboratories. That to survive, one must move with the storm. That strength comes not from stillness, but from the ability to remember motion and remain standing after it. In art and philosophy, this truth takes on human meaning. In biology, it takes on structure and chemistry. But the essence is the same, the conversation between force and form. The slow intelligence of trees. There's a growing field of research called plant neurobiology, though the name is controversial since plants have no neurons. Its central idea is that plants can process information, respond to stimuli, and even learn over time through biochemical networks. When researchers repeatedly expose plants to specific stimuli, light, vibration, even sound, they find that plants adjust their future responses. In 2014, a team led by Monica Gagliano performed an experiment with Mimosa pudica, a plant that folds its leaves when touched. After repeated harmless drops, the plants stopped closing their leaves, as though they had learned the touch was not a threat. Weeks later, the memory persisted. If a small herb can remember the absence of danger, how much might a forest remember the constant presence of wind? Each vibration, each subtle pull of air, leaves traces in countless cells and tissues. The tree is not aware, but it is adaptive. It is, in a very real sense, intelligent, just not in the way we define intelligence. The silence that speaks. At dusk, when the forest begins to cool, you might notice how the air settles. The wind fades, and with it, a kind of stillness arrives that is almost physical, as though the world is holding its breath. But even now, inside the trunks, behind after experience has passed through. So as the wind fades and the world grows still, perhaps you'll remember the trees. How they listened, how they learned, how they became the very shape of survival. And so, as we continue to drift deeper into this quiet study of wind and memory, let us look upward again, to the forest canopy. Because what happens in those emerald heights is nothing short of symphonic. Each leaf, each tiny petiole, that slender stalk connecting the leaf to the branch, responds to the wind in its own rhythm. It twists, pivots, and trembles. At first glance, it might seem chaotic, but the longer we watch, the more we realize there is an order to this dance. The forest canopy does not move like an ocean whipped by storm. It moves like breath. A shared, invisible respiration, a slow exhale of motion that ripples across the treetops. When the wind arrives, the trees do not fight it. They yield, distribute, and share the load. Some researchers, studying the biomechanics of trees, describe this as the dynamic reconfiguration of canopy architecture. A poetic way to say, trees bend to become more aerodynamic, reducing resistance and stress. In the process, they change their own geometry, not permanently at first, but enough to alter how future winds will touch them. In a grove of beeches in Germany, scientists once attached tiny accelerometers to branches, recording their motion during storms. What they found was astonishing. Even when branches looked still to the human eye, micro vibrations continued long after the wind passed, a gentle quiver, like the afterecho of a bell. It was as though the wood retained the wind's fingerprint. And in time, those tiny echoes triggered slow biochemical responses, changes in growth hormone levels, shifts in cambial activity, subtle recalibrations to brace for what might come again. This, in essence, is memory without neurons, a kind of mechanical cognition, written in cellulose and sap instead of synapses and neurotransmitters. When you imagine a forest now, perhaps it feels less like a collection of still things and more like a thinking body, a distributed intelligence. Each trunk is a nerve, each root a wire, each gust a signal passing through the system. Wind doesn't just sculpt trees physically, it also shapes their social lives. In dense stands, neighboring trees influence one another's sway. Foresters have a term for this, crown shyness, the mysterious phenomenon where the outermost branches of tall trees avoid touching, leaving thin ribbons of sky between their crowns. Some believe this helps reduce the spread of disease or insects. Others think it minimizes mechanical damage from collisions in high winds. But perhaps more simply, it is the result of trees learning each other's boundaries through countless gentle brushes of breeze. A kind of etiquette born from motion. Imagine standing in a rainforest at dawn, the air heavy, the light diffuse, the first whispers of wind weaving between trunks. The canopy above isn't still, it's listening. It remembers yesterday's storm, last year's cyclone, decades of monsoon patterns. In the architecture of each branch, the curvature of each limb, the thickness of each ring, there are traces of wind long gone. Deep inside the trunk, these memories take root in wood anatomy itself. When a tree experiences persistent wind from one direction, it begins to reinforce its structure asymmetrically. The side facing the prevailing wind thickens, forming what botanists call reaction wood. In conifers, this is compression wood. In hardwoods, tension wood. Both serve a similar purpose, to counteract bending forces and restore verticality. This adaptation unfolds slowly, over years. The tree literally grows a story of struggle into its bones. Its rings are not perfect circles. They become ellipses, thicker on one side, thinner on another, an autobiography of pressure and persistence. Even after the tree dies, these traces endure. In cross-sections of timber hundreds of years old, dendrochronologists, tree ring scientists, can read wind history like an old diary. A cluster of narrow rings might tell of a wind-exposed ridge, a stormy decade, or even a neighboring tree that fell, altering the air's flow. The memory remains, preserved in lignin and cellulose, waiting for human eyes to translate it again into story. There's a quiet comfort in realizing that memory, in nature, does not require consciousness. The earth remembers through form. The desert remembers through dunes reshaped by wind. The mountain remembers through scars of erosion. And trees, they remember through the tilt of their trunks, the density of their fibers, the dance of their leaves when the wind returns. When we walk among them, we walk through living history, a slow record of resilience, written in vertical lines. It's as though every gust of wind we feel on our skin is part of a much larger conversation, one that's been happening since the first plant reached for the sky. Let's pause for a moment here. If you close your eyes, imagine yourself sitting beneath a tall cedar, the air still but expectant. The leaves shift faintly, the way breath trembles before speech. You might not see it, but inside the trunk, millions of cells are stretching, compressing, communicating. The tree is alive in ways we seldom perceive, not only metabolically, but mechanically, electrically, hydraulically. Tiny electrical potentials flow through its tissues, not unlike neurons firing in the human brain. When a branch bends in wind, these microcurrents fluctuate. It's been observed that changes in voltage can cascade into biochemical signals, altering the movement of calcium ions, which in turn modulate growth and gene expression. What we call memory in animals, the capacity to adapt based on prior experience, is, in some sense, mirrored here in plants. The tree does not think as we do, but it adjusts, it learns, and it anticipates. Even seedlings display this strange awareness. In laboratory experiments, when young plants are gently touched or mechanically stimulated, they alter their growth trajectory. If the same movement happens again, the plant's response diminishes, as if it remembers the experience and recognizes it as non-threatening. This phenomenon, known as habituation, is one of the simplest forms of memory observed in biology. So perhaps when we say trees remember the wind, it's not a metaphor at all. It's a literal biological truth, one expressed not through recollection, but through embodiment. They carry their memories in form, not thought. But what of the wind itself? What does it remember? Every gust is born somewhere, over an ocean, across a valley, between warm and cold fronts that have danced for millennia. The wind that brushes your face today might once have swept through cedar groves in Japan, or desert dunes in North Africa. In this sense, the wind is also a carrier of memory, a physical record of temperature, geography, and motion. When it passes through the forest, it doesn't just shape the trees. It listens to them too and carries traces of their scent, their pollen, their moisture into the wider world. The earth then becomes a single breathing organism, atmosphere and biosphere exchanging memories with every breeze. Somewhere deep in the Amazon, an old kapok tree leans slightly to the east, its vast crown catching the wind like a sail. It has stood there for nearly 400 years. Generations of wind, have carved their signature into its massive frame. Every curve of its trunk is a chapter, every scar a remembered storm. When the night air moves through its canopy, it hums, a low, almost inaudible tone resonating through its wood. Scientists call these sounds acoustic emissions, the faint crackle of microscopic fibers stretching and settling. But maybe, on a quieter level, it's the tree's way of whispering back to the wind that raised it. I remember you. The forest is never truly silent. Even when the air stills and the leaves hang motionless, there is a low hum beneath everything, a quiet pulse, invisible to the ear but alive in the soil. This hum is the voice of connection, because trees do not live in isolation. Each one, from the youngest sapling to the oldest oak, is part of a vast, subterranean web, an intricate network of roots, fungi, and microbes. This hidden infrastructure, often called the mycorrhizal network, is sometimes described as the wood wide web. Through it, nutrients flow, electrical signals flicker, and in ways we are only beginning to understand, information moves. If the wind is the language of the canopy, then the soil is the language of memory. Here underfoot, trees whisper to one another about drought, danger, and change. And perhaps, among these signals, they also share the memory of the wind, the pressures and patterns that shape their collective growth. Imagine the forest floor beneath your feet, a dense tapestry of roots interlaced with threads of fungal hyphae, so fine that a single gram of soil might contain several kilometers of them. These filaments act as both messengers and mediators. When a tree is rocked by wind, its root pressure shifts. The movement travels down the trunk, through its vascular system into the ground, a faint hydraulic pulse. Neighboring roots detect this change, responding in kind. In the lab, scientists have observed how mechanical stress in one part of a plant can trigger electrical and hormonal responses in another, even across different individuals connected by fungi. It's as if the forest itself absorbs the tremor, diffusing it through its collective body, a distributed sensitivity, a shared awareness. When the wind sweeps across the treetops, then, it doesn't just move wood and leaf. It moves information, weaving through every layer of the ecosystem, from sky to soil, from leaf to lichen. And each level remembers in its own quiet way. In 1997, Susan Simard, a forest ecologist in British Columbia, made a discovery that reshaped how we think about trees. She demonstrated that carbon, the very breath of life exchanged during photosynthesis, could pass from one tree to another through underground fungal networks. Later experiments revealed something even more profound. When one tree was stressed by drought or damage, it could send chemical warnings through the network, altering the behavior of its neighbors. Simard called these large, central individuals mother trees. They act as hubs, older, deeply rooted beings that nourish and guide younger saplings. They seem to sense where help is needed, adjusting their flow of carbon, nitrogen, and water accordingly. Now imagine what happens when such a mother tree feels the wind. Its branches sway, its roots pull and release with subtle tension. The vibrations travel through the ground, modulating pressures and electric fields. And though we cannot yet fully measure it, the network below might be registering that same event, a tremor in the common memory of the forest. Wind, then, becomes not only a sculptor of individual trees, but a kind of collective teacher. It trains the forest as a whole to flex, yield, and stand together. We tend to picture wind as chaotic, as random, unpredictable motion. But to the forest, the wind has a grammar. It has rhythms and tones that recur across seasons and years. Spring breezes are gentle rehearsals. Winter gales are lessons in endurance. Each generation of trees inherits this invisible curriculum. A seedling born in the lee of a windbreak grows differently from one exposed to open plains. Its wood forms with fewer spiral grains. Its canopy learns restraint. And when storms come, it survives or falls according to that early education. The forest, in this way, practices what we might call ecological memory, the capacity of an ecosystem to retain the imprint of past events and translate them into resilience. Every species, every layer of soil, carries a piece of that memory. Even after a fire or a hurricane, traces remain in the soil microbiome, in the genetic tendencies of regrown saplings, in the pattern of returning mosses. The memory of wind, fire, flood, these are not erased but absorbed, shaping the next cycle. When wind passes through a grove of aspen, the result is hypnotic, thousands of leaves fluttering in near-perfect unison. Their flattened stems, or petioles, allow them to twist and shimmer, scattering light like a million coins in motion. But what's remarkable is how the grove itself responds as a single organism. Aspens often grow from shared root systems, vast underground colonies that can stretch for acres. Each trunk we see above ground is technically a stem of one enormous being, connected by living tissue. When wind sways one, it sways them all. Their shared roots distribute the strain, preventing any single trunk from bearing too much. This cooperation is not conscious, but it is profoundly intelligent. It represents a principle found throughout life, distributed sensitivity, where the well-being of the whole depends on the communication of its parts. In that sense, wind teaches unity. It binds trees into a living architecture of balance and support. Let's move deeper now into how trees feel the wind. Within each cell wall lies a network of tiny fibers, microfibrils, bound together by flexible polymers. When wind bends a branch, these fibers stretch and compress. Sensors embedded in the cell membranes, proteins known as mechanoreceptors, detect this tension. They open channels, allowing ions like calcium to flood into the cell. This simple movement of ions becomes a signal, spreading from cell to cell like a slow, silent wave. Over time, the repeated triggering of these receptors builds a kind of mechanical memory. The plant learns to anticipate the pattern of force, responding more efficiently each time. It may thicken its cell walls, redirect growth hormones, or alter its lignin composition, all subtle adjustments made in response to remembered motion. If a sapling is grown in still air, it develops differently, tall, thin, fragile. But if it is brushed gently each day, it grows shorter, stronger, more resilient. This phenomenon, thigmomorphogenesis, shows how physical experience becomes structure. The memory of touch, of movement, is literally built into the body of the tree. In a way, wind is both the teacher and the sculptor, instructing trees in how to be strong by making them sway. At night, when the forest quiets, those lessons are stored. Sap continues to flow, but slowly. Cells repair themselves. Biochemical signals fade into long-term changes in gene expression. It's not unlike sleep, that sacred time when animals consolidate their memories. Perhaps trees, too, enter a kind of deep processing phase, where the sensations of the day are translated into growth. If you could stand in that forest, eyes closed, you might sense it. A living system, humming softly in the dark, remembering the shape of the wind. In some indigenous traditions, the wind is not just a force of weather. It is a spirit of memory, a carrier of voices. It is said that when the wind moves through the trees, it is the ancestors speaking, reminding the forest of what once was. Science might phrase it differently, but the essence is the same. The past leaves a trace in the present. Every breeze carries echoes of what has come before. When we listen to the wind, then, we're not just feeling air. We're brushing against the stored experiences of the world, the accumulated memory of motion, translated into rustle and sigh. And perhaps that's the quiet lesson here. Memory doesn't have to be conscious to be profound. The earth remembers without words. It writes in patterns of growth, in layers of soil, in the way a forest bends but does not break. When the next wind comes, as it always does, each tree will move differently because of the ones that came before. And in that movement lies a kind of wisdom. That strength is not the absence of bending, but the grace of remembering how to return. Somewhere, perhaps tonight, the wind is singing through a forest. You might not notice it at first, only the distant hush, the layered whisper of leaves moving in uneven waves. But if you listen closely, you begin to hear structure, tone, rhythm, resonance. The forest is not merely moved by the wind, it plays it, like an instrument tuned over centuries. Every trunk, every branch, every hollow between roots becomes part of a grand orchestra, an acoustic cathedral of wood and air. The low groans of old oaks, the higher tremolos of birch and aspen, the dry chatter of pine needles rubbing together, all of it composes a single living score. And through it the trees remember. Because wind is not only a sculptor of shape and strength, it is also a teacher of sound. Over time, the tones a forest produces become part of its feedback loop, shaping how animals interact with it, how seeds disperse, how communication evolves. This is the music of resilience, the echo of movement stored in matter. When wind travels through a branch, it doesn't move uniformly. Different frequencies pass through wood at different speeds, depending on the density and moisture of the tissue. These vibrations are subtle, inaudible to us most of the time, but they create standing waves that help the tree sense its own structure. In a sense, the tree listens to itself. Researchers studying acoustic emissions in plants discovered that these vibrations increase when trees are under stress. During drought, tiny air bubbles form in the water-conducting vessels, a process called cavitation. Each bubble's collapse produces a faint ultrasonic pop, like a sigh beneath the bark. By recording these sounds, scientists can tell when a tree is thirsty, struggling, or even dying, all without cutting into it. But there's another layer here, one less studied but profoundly beautiful to consider. When the wind moves through a tree and the tree responds, both are changed. The air learns to move differently through the space. The wood, reshaped by countless such encounters, becomes more attuned to the patterns of its environment. Over decades, even centuries, this interaction becomes a kind of acoustic memory, not in the brain, but in the resonance of matter. Think of a violin. A new one sounds raw, a little unrefined. But after years of being played, its tone matures. The vibrations align the fibers of the wood, compressing resins and shaping the microscopic pathways of sound. The violin begins to remember the music it has made. Now imagine the same principle applied to a forest. Every storm, every passing breeze, every small movement of animal or rain adds to the acoustic history of wood. A living violin of immense scale, tuned by the earth's own breath. There are stories of foresters who can identify trees by their sound alone, the creak of a pine, the hollow echo of an ash trunk, the deep tone of a beech when struck gently by the hand. These aren't coincidences. They're signatures of structure, of memory carved into grain. Sound, like wind, carries far more than motion. It carries information. Birds have long used the forest's acoustic qualities to navigate and communicate. Certain species choose nesting sites based on how sound travels through the trees. Dense canopies dampen calls. Open groves amplify them. Even insects respond to these cues. Some cicadas adjust their songs depending on wind and vegetation, ensuring their mates can still hear them through the shifting chorus of leaves. The forest then becomes a living soundscape, a feedback system where the behavior of life is shaped by the sound of its own environment. Over time, the forest learns from this music. It grows denser in some places, thinner in others, altering its own acoustics to balance wind, water, and animal life. Every echo, every vibration feeds back into growth. This is memory at the ecosystem scale, slow, resonant, enduring. Long before science sought to explain these things, people felt them. Ancient cultures saw the wind as the breath of gods, a sacred voice carried through trees. In Norse mythology, Yggdrasil, the world tree, holds the realms together, its leaves rustling with divine whispers. In Japanese Shinto belief, Kodama, spirits dwell in trees, and their voices echo in the wind that stirs the forest. Even today, when the wind sighs through a pine grove, something in us still listens instinctively. Perhaps that's because we, too, are shaped by rhythm. Our bodies are tuned to cycles, breath, heartbeat, tide, season. When we hear wind through trees, we hear ourselves in it, an external mirror of our internal pulse. The memory of wind, then, isn't just in the tree, it's in our response to its sound. It reminds us of continuity, of things that move slowly but endure, that bend without breaking, that whisper but never forget. In the 1960s, researchers began experimenting with sound frequencies and plant growth. They found that certain vibrations, even ones imperceptible to humans, could stimulate cell division, increase chlorophyll content, and accelerate germination. Other sounds, harsh or discordant, had the opposite effect. To a tree, wind is a natural symphony of such frequencies. It doesn't just shake leaves, it sends vibrations deep into the cambium, stirring the very rhythm of life. The tree, in turn, responds by reinforcing or relaxing specific tissues, by thickening bark where stress is strongest, by aligning new fibers to tune itself to the recurring music of its surroundings. In this way, every forest becomes a record, a living archive of sound turned into strength. At the edge of a coastal cliff in Ireland stands a grove of wind-bent pines. Their trunks are twisted like dancers frozen in motion, shaped by centuries of Atlantic gales. When the wind blows, their entire form sings, low, hollow tones echoing through their limbs. Some travelers claim that if you stand there long enough, you can hear a pattern, like an old song repeating in the gusts. And perhaps they are right. The trees, after all, have been playing this melody for hundreds of years, a duet between wood and wind, remembering one another through vibration. Each gust reawakens those frequencies, and the grove replies, resonating in the same familiar key. What we hear as eerie music might be the physical sound of memory being replayed. Beneath this poetic idea lies something deeply real. Matter itself, not just life, but the physical universe, has the ability to retain traces of what has passed through it. From the ripples in a pond that slowly fade, to the worn smoothness of a stone touched by water, to the spiral of a galaxy holding echoes of its collisions, everything that has ever moved leaves an imprint. Trees are part of that continuum. Their bodies remember through form, chemistry, and resonance. When we speak of the memory of wind, we're also speaking of a universal pattern, the way energy leaves a trail, the way motion becomes story. So when a gust bends a branch, and the tree later grows stronger in that direction, it's a continuation of that same cosmic memory, a small act of the universe learning itself again through living wood. At night, when storms roll across mountain ranges, forests sing in ways no human microphone can truly capture. Winds hum in the low subsonic range, frequencies that travel miles, shaking the ground, rippling through roots. Animals sense these vibrations in their bones. Seeds in the soil shift imperceptibly. And the trees, those patient recorders of motion, sway with familiarity, responding not with fear, but with a kind of ancient grace. Because they've been here before. They've survived tempests, centuries of gales, and the long calm that follows. Each storm is not an interruption, it's a reminder. Somewhere deep in that forest, an old oak waits. Its bark is thick and furrowed. Its heartwood holds centuries of rings, each one a circular echo of storms past. When the wind comes again, it leans slightly, not out of weakness but recognition. It knows this song. It's danced to it before. And in the rhythm of that motion, in the gentle creak of its limbs, the oak remembers. When ancient builders first began shaping stone into places of worship, they were not only constructing walls, they were attempting to contain the breath of the world. In every cathedral arch and column, there is an echo of forests, the memory of trunks and canopies transformed into geometry. Look at the great cathedrals of Europe, Notre Dame, Chartres, Salisbury. Their ribbed vaults rise like branching limbs. Their buttresses curve outward, balancing invisible pressures as trees do with roots. To stand inside one of these vast halls is to be inside a stone forest, a place where wind once moved through leaves, now moving through stained glass and echoing choirs. The builders may not have known it consciously, but they were remembering the structure of life that surrounded them. They built as trees grew, upward, outward, listening to weight and resonance. And like the forests that inspired them, these cathedrals sing when the wind passes through. Even today, when a storm rolls across Paris or Canterbury, you can hear the sound of the wind humming through the towers, deep, resonant tones that vibrate the stones themselves. These vibrations are the same physics that move through tree trunks, the same invisible language of pressure, resistance, and harmony. Every structure, living or built, participates in the conversation of air. Humanity, in its own way, has been trying to remember this language for millennia. We shape our homes to face the sun, our gardens to catch the wind, our music to mirror the rhythm of water and air. We call it architecture, but perhaps it's more accurate to call it echo-making. There's a reason old wooden houses creak. Over decades, the timber adjusts to the climate, expanding and contracting with temperature and humidity, bending slightly with each gust of wind. In doing so, it becomes acoustically alive. Those groans and sighs at night are not signs of decay, but of memory, the sound of a structure remembering every season it has endured. In Japan, the art of suki-yukuri, traditional wooden architecture, embraces this philosophy. Walls are thin, roofs broad, and spaces open to the elements. The goal is not to seal the house from nature, but to let nature breathe through it. When the wind passes through the paper walls of a tea house, it whispers softly, a deliberate design that blurs the line between inside and outside. The building, like a forest, becomes a living instrument. Modern science might call this biomimicry, the imitation of nature's designs. But long before the term existed, humans were already practicing it intuitively. The pattern of veins in a leaf reappears in city grids, in rivers, in the flow of roads and power lines. The branching of neurons in the brain mirrors the branching of roots and trees, both optimized to transmit information efficiently. It seems that life, whether grown or built, always arrives at similar solutions. It learns to distribute, to balance, to resonate. Even our music follows this rule. The shape of a violin body, curved to amplify vibration, is a refinement of the same physics that shapes the hollow of a log or the chamber of a shell. When Antonio Stradivari crafted his violins in the 17th century, he selected maple and spruce not just for strength, but for memory. These woods had lived through years of alpine wind and snow, their fibers seasoned by motion. The instruments they became were, quite literally, the sound of wind turned to art. We could say the same of cities. They too are forests made not of trees but of ideas, stone, and motion. Every skyline is a new kind of canopy, bending and swaying in unseen ways. Skyscrapers hum when the wind moves through them. Their glass and steel resonate at specific frequencies, carefully tuned to prevent collapse. Even our tallest towers must learn to yield, to move with the air, not against it. In this, cities inherit the wisdom of trees. Their survival depends not on rigidity, but flexibility. And when you stand among them on a windy evening, the sound they make, a deep, low chorus of air moving between walls, is strangely organic. It is the modern echo of an ancient forest's breath. Human philosophy has long sensed this connection. Stoics spoke of pneuma, the breath that animates all things from stones to stars. Eastern philosophies called it kai, prana, kai, the subtle movement that binds matter to spirit. And though science replaced such language with physics and fluid dynamics, the truth remains the same. Motion is memory, and wind is the thread that binds it all. Every gust through a canyon, every breeze across a field, is an invisible history of pressure and flow. When it meets resistance, a mountain, a tree, a wall, it shapes the form before it, and is itself reshaped in return. That dialogue is the essence of all structure, all growth, all design. To forget this is to build silence. To remember it is to build resonance. Perhaps that's why the most peaceful human spaces, monasteries, temples, gardens, are designed for listening. They amplify the small sounds, a single leaf falling, a trickle of water, the hum of air through corridors. These places remind us that intelligence doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it speaks through stillness. The philosopher Gaston Bachelard once wrote
that the house shelters daydreaming. He meant that our spaces shape our thoughts. A space that breathes with wind encourages us to breathe with it, to think in rhythms larger than our own. In such places, even silence becomes a kind of dialogue. The connection between trees and architecture is not just metaphorical, it is genetic. Every beam of wood carries within it the grain of growth, a map of seasons past, of stresses survived. When cut and joined into a roof or bridge, those rings remain invisible, but still aligned in the direction of life. Even transformed, the wood remembers the wind. And so our creations carry within them a trace of nature's original intelligence. The same patterns that keep a forest alive, keep a city standing, a violin singing, a cathedral echoing. We have never truly invented anything new, only translated the Earth's grammar into new materials. Late one night, in a quiet library, a philosopher once wrote that form is frozen motion. Perhaps that is the most accurate definition of architecture, of art, of life itself. Everything solid is just motion remembered. And when the wind moves again, through a tree, a street, a tower, it reawakens that memory, reminding matter of its dance. So the next time you hear the wind through a window, listen carefully. What you're hearing is not just air. It is history moving, the same force that shaped the forests, the same rhythm that guided the builders, the same quiet intelligence that connects the living and the made. The wind remembers, and through our creations, so do we. Where we left off, the wind had moved through stone cathedrals, through old wooden houses, and through the imagination of humanity itself. But the wind does not only shape the outer world. It also passes through the corridors of our inner one, the mind, the heart, the unseen landscape of thought and feeling. Just as trees record the passage of storms in the thickness of their rings, we too record the weather of our lives. Each joy, each sorrow, each quiet day of calm leaves a pattern within us, a grain, a memory, a bend in our being. And like the branches that learn how far they can stretch before breaking, we learn too how far the self can bend before it must grow in a new direction. The human nervous system is, in many ways, a forest. Its billions of neurons stretch and intertwine like roots and canopies, forming pathways of connection that remember, adapt, and evolve with every new experience. When we feel the wind on our skin, signals ripple through this internal woodland, electric and chemical, swift and subtle. The sensation doesn't just touch the body, it touches memory. Neuroscientists have discovered that even the simplest breeze can activate emotional centers in the brain, linking the physical sensation of air with feelings of calm, nostalgia, or alertness. This is because the brain's sensory and emotional regions are deeply entwined, like vines sharing the same trellis. The touch of wind on the face may remind us, without words, of childhood moments running through fields, standing near the sea, walking under trees. The wind, then, is not only an external force, but a key that opens hidden rooms within the mind. There is something ancient in the way our bodies react to moving air. In early evolution, wind carried both danger and comfort. It brought the smell of rain and fire, the scent of predators, the promise of food or migration. It guided the migrations of birds, the dispersal of seeds, and in its rhythm, our ancestors found the first measure of time. To this day, the sound of wind still influences human emotion. In studies of soundscapes, researchers found that people describe wind not as noise, but as presence. It is alive, continuous, both outside and within. Perhaps that is why we use the same breath to speak, to sing, to sigh. The same invisible current that moves through trees moves through our lungs. When we breathe deeply, we are joining the conversation of wind. Each inhalation is a quiet echo of the planet's atmosphere, air that once passed through forests, oceans, and the open mouths of mountains. This air, billions of years old, connects every living thing. You could say that every breath we take is a form of remembering. The philosopher Alan Watts once said that breathing is not something we do, but something that happens to us. He meant that life breathes itself through us as it does through leaves. We do not own the wind, we share it. And in that sharing, we participate in the same exchange of gases, motion, and energy that sustains all life on Earth. A forest, after all, breathes with us. When we exhale carbon dioxide, trees inhale it. When they release oxygen, we receive it. We are quite literally each other's lungs. Inside this continuous exchange lies something almost spiritual, a quiet companionship between beings who never meet but always depend on one another. It is not love in the human sense, but it is a form of care enacted through chemistry and physics. The wind is the messenger of that care, carrying the breath of one life to another. Consider this: when a storm crosses an ocean and moves into a forest, it carries traces of salt, water vapor, and organic compounds from distant shores. When those molecules are absorbed by the trees, a tiny piece of the sea becomes part of the forest. And when those trees release oxygen, part of that sea enters your lungs. The world is constantly exchanging itself, molecule by molecule, breath by breath. Every gust of wind, every sigh, every quiet moment of stillness in the air, it all belongs to the same endless dialogue. Psychologists studying human memory often describe trauma and healing as forms of weather. A sudden shock, like a storm, can uproot the stability of the mind, breaking familiar patterns and leaving behind wreckage. But over time, new growth emerges. Just as trees grow around their scars, humans rebuild around what they've endured. The memory of the storm never vanishes, but it becomes integrated into the structure, making it stronger, wiser, more resilient. This is not metaphorical flourish, it is measurable biology. The brain rewires itself in response to experience, pruning old connections and forming new ones, a process neuroscientists call neuroplasticity. It is, in essence, the brain's way of remembering the wind. Every emotional gust, every inner storm, teaches it how to move differently, how to bend without breaking. In a quiet laboratory in Japan, researchers once placed saplings in a wind tunnel and exposed them to gentle, controlled breezes for hours a day. Over time, these young trees developed stronger trunks and deeper roots than those grown in still air. The lesson was clear: without challenge, growth remains fragile. The wind, even when difficult, is necessary for resilience. The same principle applies to human life. Our emotional landscapes, the heartbreaks, losses, and uncertainties, act like the wind on our inner forest. They shape us, force us to adapt, to anchor more deeply in what matters. Without resistance, we might never discover the strength within. It's a humbling symmetry, the physics of air guiding the evolution of both wood and will. We often think of memory as something stored, static, like files in a cabinet. But memory, like wind, is movement. Each time we recall something, the brain subtly alters the memory, reshaping its contours, softening or intensifying its edges. In remembering, we rewrite the past, the way a gust reshapes the surface of sand or snow. Over a lifetime, our memories too become landscapes, sculpted, fluid, alive. This process mirrors the forest's way of remembering. When a storm bends a branch, the tree responds with chemical changes, strengthening certain fibers, adjusting growth direction. The result is not a frozen record of what happened, but a dynamic adaptation, a living memory that continues to evolve. So both human and tree remember through change, not stasis. Both learn by moving with the wind. In therapy, there is a term called somatic memory, the idea that the body itself can remember experiences beyond the reach of conscious thought. Muscles hold tension, posture holds stories, breath patterns hold emotions. When someone heals, it is often not through forgetting, but through learning to move again, to let the air flow freely through the body's architecture. In a sense, healing is the restoration of wind. When breath can move without resistance, life begins to hum again. And just as trees need the flex of air to stay strong, humans need the gentle motion of feeling and reflection to remain alive inside. We are, in every sense, atmospheric beings, carved by pressures, sculpted by flow, made resilient by storms. And when we finally learn to move with the currents of our inner world, rather than fight them, we rediscover the same quiet intelligence that trees have known for millions of years. Even dreams, those nightly forests of the mind, follow this rule of movement and memory. During REM sleep, when the brain replays fragments of experience, it behaves like a windstorm reshuffling leaves, scattering, sorting, reordering what we have lived through. In the morning, what remains is not chaos, but integration. The roots of memory grow deeper, the canopy of understanding spreads wider. Dreams are how we bend inwardly. They allow the mind to sway, to test new directions, to practice resilience in imagination before facing it in reality. And sometimes, like a gentle wind at dawn, they carry whispers from the past, small reminders of who we were and how far we've grown. It is strange, then, how often we think of stability as stillness. We wish for peace, for quiet, for lives without turbulence, forgetting that even the calmest forest must sway a little to survive. True peace is not the absence of motion, but harmony within it. To be still yet alive, like a tree, means to be in constant conversation with what moves around us. So perhaps our minds, too, are ecosystems. When we resist every gust, every change, every challenge, we become brittle. But when we listen, adapt, and allow ourselves to move with the winds of circumstance, we grow deeper roots, clearer memories, and gentler hearts. The intelligence of trees and of humans may be the same at its core. Not the power to dominate the wind, but the wisdom to dance with it. There's a moment, late at night, when the world feels almost perfectly still. The hum of human activity quiets. The air hangs motionless, like a breath waiting to be released. But if you listen closely, truly listen, you can still hear movement. A distant murmur in the leaves, the low sigh of the sky. It's the sound of the planet breathing. Wind does not stop when we do. Even in silence, air continues to circulate, rising and falling, looping and folding over itself in patterns older than life. It flows across deserts, over oceans, between mountains. And as it moves, it connects everything: the forest to the sea to the city to the stars. In the stillness, we are not alone. We are suspended inside the movement of a living planet. The story of wind does not end at the edge of the forest or even at the edge of the atmosphere. It continues upward into the great breath of the earth itself, the global dance of air and temperature and pressure that shapes our weather, our climate, our destiny. Every breeze that brushes your face began its journey long before you felt it. It may have risen as warm air above the Pacific, crossed mountains in vapor form, cooled into clouds over a desert, and then descended days later as the gentle wind through your window. The air we breathe has traveled farther than any human journey, looping endlessly around the world, carrying with it dust, pollen, spores, and the faint chemical whispers of distant forests. Somewhere above us, invisible but powerful, are the Hadley cells, Ferrel cells, and polar cells, vast atmospheric currents circulating energy from equator to pole. They are the arteries of the planet's breath, transferring warmth, shaping clouds, and guiding the flow of storms. What we feel as mere weather is the surface ripple of a deep planetary respiration. When ancient sailors spoke of the trade winds, they weren't just naming a meteorological phenomenon, they were describing a partnership. They learned to read the breath of the earth, to move with it rather than against it. Their sails filled with air that had crossed entire continents, carrying dust from Africa to the Caribbean, moisture from the Atlantic to Europe. And in that motion, they glimpsed something profound, that life thrives not in resistance to wind, but in collaboration with it. Even now, every storm, every gust, every whisper of wind that crosses the sea carries within it microscopic particles, fragments of diatoms, crystals of salt, spores of fungi. These travel vast distances, landing in new ecosystems, sparking life in unexpected places. In this way, the planet's memory spreads itself, an invisible library of movement and renewal. The trees, once again, are both students and teachers of this great cycle. They receive these airborne messengers, absorb their minerals through rain and soil, and send their own stories back into the air through scent and vapor. Every breath of the forest is a small letter to the sky. But beyond Earth, the story of wind grows stranger, more mysterious. Because the universe itself, it seems, remembers how to move. Consider Jupiter, that vast, storm-wrapped planet. Its upper atmosphere swirls in bands of color, immense rivers of gas flowing endlessly, driven by rotation and heat. At its center spins the Great Red Spot, a storm so large it could swallow our world whole. And so ancient, it has raged for at least 300 years. There, in a world with no solid surface, wind becomes the only geography. Mountains of air, valleys of pressure. Jupiter remembers not through trees or rocks, but through motion itself, the eternal dance of its atmosphere. On Saturn, the poles are marked by hexagonal storms, six-sided wind patterns that remain perfectly symmetrical despite the chaos beneath them. Scientists still don't fully understand why, but some believe it's a kind of self-organizing geometry, the same principle that shapes snowflakes, shells, and honeycombs. The universe, it seems, prefers to move beautifully. And even on Mars, where the air is thin and fragile, the wind never sleeps. It sculpts dunes, shifts dust across valleys, and erases the footprints of robotic explorers. The Martian wind is slow, quiet, but relentless. Every motion becomes a story written across the sand, a record of a planet still dreaming of weather. In all of these worlds, there is a pattern, the same one that moves through our forests and lungs. Motion remembering itself. Energy learning the shape of resistance. If we look deep enough, the entire universe behaves like a vast atmosphere. Galaxies swirl around invisible centers. Stars form from collapsing clouds of gas and dust, ignited by the gentle pressure of gravity, cosmic wind folding upon itself until it burns with light. Even the space between galaxies is not empty. It's filled with a faint, ghostly wind, a flow of particles and radiation, a whisper of the Big Bang still echoing across time. In this sense, every gust of wind on Earth is part of a far older story. The air around us is made of atoms born in the hearts of stars, scattered by supernovae, gathered by gravity into this delicate blue planet. The oxygen in your breath once drifted through space as stardust. The nitrogen that fills your lungs was forged in a sun that lived and died before our world began. We are breathing ancient memories, the wind of creation itself. The philosopher Carl Sagan often said, "We are a way for the universe to know itself." Perhaps it's equally true that we are a way for the universe to breathe itself. Every exhalation, every whisper of air through leaves is the cosmos remembering motion, reliving its own first breath. And in that thought, something tender emerges. That our smallest actions, the way we speak, the way we sigh, the way we listen, all contribute to this grand, ongoing exchange. Every breath joins the wind that has traveled across time. Every thought adds to the invisible motion of energy that shapes everything from weather to memory to the spin of galaxies. When we understand this, stillness takes on a new meaning. To sit quietly beneath a tree is not an act of idleness, but of alignment. You become part of the same current, the same flow of energy that moves clouds, oceans, planets. The air that touches your skin is the same air that has brushed mountains, deserts, and stars. To breathe is to participate in eternity. Perhaps that is why wind has always felt sacred to humans. In nearly every language, the words for wind, breath, and spirit are the same. In Latin, spiritus. In Hebrew, ruach. In Greek, pneuma. All mean the same thing, movement of air and movement of soul. The ancients may have known, intuitively, what science is only now rediscovering, that to breathe is to belong to something much larger, and that every motion of air is an echo of the beginning of all things. And so, as the night deepens and the world quiets again, let us return to the forest. The wind has softened, the branches sway like slow metronomes. You can almost hear the trees exhale, the earth cooling under stars that hum with their own invisible motion. Somewhere far above, Jupiter's storm still spins. Somewhere closer, an ocean breeze rises to meet the dawn. And here, beneath the canopy, a single leaf trembles, not from fear or cold, but from participation. It knows that motion is the language of memory. That to move, to breathe, to yield is to live. And in that yielding, the tree remembers the wind, and the wind, in turn, remembers the tree. At the edge of the forest, dawn begins again. Mist clings to the undergrowth, and light filters through branches like slow-moving water. The wind is awake, not loud or wild, but gentle, almost hesitant, as if remembering the shape of its journey. The trees stir, their leaves flicker, and for a brief, shimmering moment, it feels as though the entire forest is breathing in rhythm with the sky. Throughout this journey, we've watched how trees listen, not with ears, but with motion. How roots feel the pull of gravity and rain. How leaves translate sunlight into sugar and wind into wisdom. How every gust becomes a kind of teacher, shaping the body of the tree until it mirrors the patience of the air itself. But perhaps what we've really been tracing is not just the intelligence of trees, but the quiet conversation between stillness and movement. Because to be alive in any form is to live in that balance. Cells divide and rest, hearts beat and pause. The earth spins and slows, tides rise and fall, winds race and vanish. Life is not constant motion, it's patterned restlessness. A rhythm that holds silence inside motion and motion inside silence. If you stand long enough in a forest, you begin to sense that rhythm. You feel the wind come and go like thought. You start to notice how every sway of a branch, every sigh of the canopy is a kind of dialogue. The wind moves the tree, and the tree changes the wind. That exchange is not one-sided. It is not a master and student. It is cooperation, evolution as conversation. The wind teaches trees flexibility. Trees teach wind patience. And together they create form, a visible memory written in the shape of trunks and the choreography of air. Science tells us that even our own bodies remember the wind. When air brushes the skin, millions of sensory cells fire in microseconds, recording, comparing, predicting. We can sense the difference between a breeze and a storm long before it arrives. Some ancient part of us, older than civilization, still listens like the forest. Perhaps that's why we find peace near trees. They remind us of an intelligence we once shared. One that doesn't speak in words, but in balance. If you look at a tree trunk closely, you'll see lines spiraling around it, traces of years and weather, like the grooves of a record. Each layer holds data, the wet years, the dry ones, the storms, the calm seasons. But it also holds something else, rhythm. Because even when trees stand still, their lives are shaped by movement. They grow in tune with the world that moves through them. And isn't that what memory really is? Not a photograph of what happened, but a pattern that has adapted to it. A transformation. Wind leaves no shape of its own, but it creates shape in everything it touches. It bends, carves, softens. It reminds life to yield without breaking. That lesson is carried in every branch, every root, every human breath. We too live in wind, the invisible motion of thoughts, emotions, and time. Each experience bends us slightly, changes our direction, teaches us how to endure without hardening. Like the trees, we learn to let what passes move through us instead of against us. And maybe that's how we remember. Not through perfect recall, but through the shape we become after the storm. Our memories are the patterns of what we've survived. Some scientists now study trees as vast, slow-moving neural networks, systems of communication where roots exchange signals and leaves respond to distant stress. Others explore how forests influence weather, how transpiration helps build clouds, how entire ecosystems breathe together. The boundary between biology and atmosphere is blurring. We are beginning to see Earth not as a collection of species, but as a single body. A planet-sized intelligence built from countless rhythms. The forests inhale what we exhale. The oceans exhale what we inhale. And between them, the sky holds the memory of both. This is the living feedback loop we call home. If the wind teaches anything, it's humility. It reminds us that what seems empty is full of connection. That stillness and movement are not opposites, but partners. That survival, at its deepest level, means learning to move gracefully within forces larger than ourselves. The trees know this. They've always known. That's why they don't fight the wind, they dance with it. And that dance, the subtle give and take, the bending and returning, is what keeps the forest alive. Tonight, when you walk outside and feel the air touch your skin, remember this. You are touching something ancient. You are standing inside the breath of the planet. The same air that cooled the first oceans, the same molecules that once brushed the wings of extinct birds, the same soft current that carried the seeds of forests long before us. You are not apart from this motion. You are part of it. Every breath, every thought, every moment of stillness, it all contributes to the great, continuous remembering. Because in the end, the wind does not just move through the world. It is the world in motion, in memory, in meaning. And perhaps, when all other sounds are gone, the last thing we'll hear will be the whisper of air through leaves. The earth's final exhale, softly saying, "I remember." Epilogue, the memory of air. Long after we are gone, the forests will still rise and fall in rhythm with the wind. The air will still travel its looping, planetary circuits. And in that motion, invisible yet eternal life will continue to whisper its intelligence. The universe began with expansion, with breath. And everything since has been a form of remembering it. We are all tree, cloud, storm, and soul, simply learning how to remember the wind.